After more than 40 years, an arrest is now made in a cold case murder of a Sioux City mother of two.
Downtown Sioux City holds its secrets beneath layers of time. The neon lights still buzz above the same streets, the same sidewalks, where a young mother once walked on a chilly autumn night in 1983. Her name was Terry McCauley. She was 18 years old, a member of the Omaha tribe, with two beautiful children waiting for her to come home. But she never would. That September night, witnesses watched as Terry climbed into a white Chevy Nova. It was the last time anyone would see her alive. 10 days later, her body was discovered in a wooded area near 33rd Street and Pavonia, killed by a point-blank shotgun blast that spoke of rage, of violence, of an evil that would haunt this community for decades to come. For 41 years, her killer walked free. For 41 years, a family waited for answers, watching as Terry's children grew up without their mother, marking birthdays, holidays, and milestones that should have been shared together. The gravel road where they found her body was eventually paved over, as if the city itself was trying to bury the memory of what happened there. But some truths refused to stay buried. In January 2025, everything changed. A killer's freedom finally came to an end. But to understand the true weight of this moment, to grasp how justice could take so long, yet never be denied, we need to return to that autumn night in 1983 when a teenage mother told her family she was going out to meet friends, not knowing she was walking into the last night of her life.
After 41 years of suffering in silence, the family is happy and thankful to hear that an arrest for the murder of my aunt Terry has taken place.
Terry McCauley, those who knew her speak of a young woman whose laugh could fill a room, whose presence brought warmth to even the coldest Iowa days. At 18, she was navigating the complex journey of young adulthood while carrying the profound responsibility of motherhood, a balancing act that showed both her strength and her determination. Terry's roots ran deep within the Omaha tribe, a heritage she carried with quiet pride. Her indigenous identity wasn't just a part of who she was, it was woven into the fabric of her daily life, influencing how she saw the world and how she hoped to raise her two young children. She lived between two worlds, splitting her time between her older brother's home and her mother's house, where her children stayed under temporary custody. It was an arrangement born of necessity, a young mother doing her best to build a stable future while still finding her own way in the world. Despite the challenges that came with being a teenage mother, those closest to Terry remember her unwavering dedication to her children. Every decision she made was with their future in mind. She dreamed of providing them with opportunities she never had, of watching them grow into their own unique individuals. Friends recall how her eyes would light up when she talked about her kids, how even on her most difficult days, the thought of them would bring a smile to her face. But Terry was more than just a mother. She was a daughter who helped her own mother with household chores, a sister who shared inside jokes with her siblings, and a friend who could be counted on for honest advice or a shoulder to cry on. Her infectious laugh was legendary among her friend group, and she had a way of making everyone feel heard and understood. She loved music, often singing along to the radio while doing everyday tasks. She had dreams of her own, of maybe going back to school someday, of building a career that would make her children proud. In the tight-knit community of Sioux City, Terry was known for her kindness. Whether it was helping a friend through a rough patch or sharing what little she had with someone in need, she lived by the values her family had instilled in her. She faced the same struggles many young people did in the early 1980s. Trying to find her place in the world, balancing responsibilities with the desire for independence and dreaming of a better tomorrow. Those who knew Terry in her final months say she was growing into herself, becoming more confident in her role as a mother while still holding on to the joy and spontaneity of youth. She was a young woman standing at the threshold of her future with endless possibilities ahead of her. No one could have known that all those possibilities, all those dreams and plans would be brutally cut short on a night that would forever change the fabric of their community.
Terry could have been a very successful Native American woman in our community that unfortunately was stolen from her.
September 26, 1983 began like any other Monday in Sioux City. The autumn air was starting to take on that familiar Midwestern chill, and the streets downtown were alive with their usual energy. For Terry McCauley, it was a night to step away from the responsibilities of motherhood to enjoy a few hours of freedom with friends in the heart of the city she called home. Downtown Sioux City in 1983 was a place where everyone seemed to know everyone else. The bars and local hangouts were gathering spots where young people would meet, share stories, and dream about their futures. Terry had told her family she was meeting friends, a common enough occurrence that raised no immediate concerns. She was 18 after all, and despite being a young mother, she was still entitled to moments of youthful independence. As the evening progressed, witnesses would later recall seeing Terry in various spots downtown. She was in good spirits, laughing and socializing, showing no signs of distress. But as the night wore on, something changed. Several people remembered a particular detail that would later haunt investigators. Terry was seen talking to someone in a white Chevy Nova. The conversation seemed casual enough at the time, not the kind of moments that would normally stick in someone's memory. Then she got into the car. That simple action, stepping into a white Chevy Nova on a chilly autumn night, would be the last time anyone saw Terry McCauley alive. The next morning, when Terry didn't return home, her family wasn't immediately alarmed. It wasn't unusual for young people to stay at a friend's house, to lose track of time, to get caught up in the moment. But as the hours ticked by, an uneasy feeling began to settle over them. Calls to friends yielded no answers. No one had seen her since the previous night. No one knew where she had gone after getting into that car. Days passed, and the gnawing concern grew into full-blown panic. This wasn't like Terry. She might have been young and free-spirited, but she was also a mother who never stayed away from her children for long. Her own mother, driven by that terrible intuition that parents sometimes have, knew something was desperately wrong. On October 1st, she went to the Sioux City Police Department to file an attempt to locate report. It was the first official acknowledgement that Terry McCauley was missing. The initial police response was measured. In 1983, it wasn't uncommon for young people to take off for a few days to rebel against responsibility to seek adventure without warning. But Terry's mother knew better. She knew her daughter. She knew that no matter what, Terry would have found a way to let them know she was safe. The days between September 26th and October 5th were a slow torture for the McCauley family. Each phone call could bring news. Each knock at the door could be Terry returning home. Her children, too young to understand the complexity of the situation, kept asking when their mother would come back. The family had no answers for them, only growing fear and desperate hope. On October 5th, 9 days after Terry's disappearance, her mother returned to the police station. This time, she filed an official missing persons report. The police could no longer treat this as a simple case of a young person taking off without warning. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The family didn't know it then, but they were living through their last hours of uncertainty. The next day would bring answers, but they would be the kind of answers that shatter lives and haunt communities for decades to come. The white Chevy Nova, the casual conversation, the simple act of getting into a car, these ordinary moments would soon be transformed into the last chapters of Terry McCauley's life, pieces of a puzzle that would take 41 years to complete. October 6th, 1983, broke cold and clear over Sioux City. Near 33rd Street and Pavonia, a quiet area where gravel roads cut through patches of woodland, a local woman was walking her dog along her usual morning route. The fallen leaves crunched beneath her feet as she made her way down the familiar path. But that morning, her dog's behavior changed. The animal became agitated, pulling her toward the underbrush that lined the gravel road. What she discovered there would change everything. There, partially concealed by the autumn foliage, lay the body of Terry McCauley. The vibrant young woman who had stepped into a white Chevy Nova just 10 days earlier was gone. The violence of her death was immediately apparent. She had been shot at point-blank range with a 20-gauge shotgun. A brutal end that spoke of both calculation and rage. Within minutes of the discovery, the quiet morning air was filled with the sound of approaching sirens. Police cars converged on the scene, and the gravel road that had served as Terry's final resting place was transformed into a hub of grim activity. Detective Tony Sunclades, one of the first investigators to arrive, would later recall the heavy silence that fell over his fellow officers as they surveyed the scene. Even for seasoned law enforcement, the brutality of the crime was shocking. The location itself spoke volumes to investigators. The killer had chosen the spot carefully, secluded enough to commit murder without witnesses, yet accessible by car. The gravel road, which would years later be paved over in the name of progress, held countless clues in its loose stones, but the technology of 1983 wasn't advanced enough to capture them all. Every tire track, every footprint, every piece of potential evidence was meticulously documented. But the limitations of forensic science at the time meant that crucial details might be missed. Word of the discovery spread through Sioux City like wildfire. For the McCauley family, the news they had dreaded most came in the form of a knock on their door. Their worst fears were confirmed. Terry was gone. The hope they had desperately clung to for 10 days evaporated in an instant, replaced by a grief so profound it would echo through generations. The medical examiner's findings painted a clear picture of Terry's final moments. The shotgun blast had been delivered at extremely close range, suggesting this wasn't a crime of opportunity, but a deliberate execution. She had likely been killed shortly after her disappearance, meaning she had spent those 10 days of desperate searching already beyond help, hidden away in the wilderness while her family prayed for her safe return. For the indigenous community, Terry's murder struck a particularly painful chord. Her death became part of a larger tragic pattern of violence against indigenous women, a pattern that would gain national attention in the decades to come. But in 1983, her murder was treated as an isolated incident. The broader implications of her identity as an indigenous woman largely overlooked by the media and law enforcement of the time. The gravel road where Terry was found would eventually disappear beneath layers of asphalt and progress, but the questions surrounding her death would linger far longer. Who had been driving the white Chevy Nova that night? Why had Terry gotten into the car? And most importantly, who had pulled the trigger of that 20-gauge shotgun, forever silencing a young mother who had her whole life ahead of her?
Hopefully, somebody out there that has that vital piece of information we need will finally come forward and give that to us, because the person that took Terry from her family, that took her life, took her off this world, is out there walking with us every day, and they absolutely deserve to be taken off the streets and face justice for what they did to Terry. So,
in the wake of Terry's murder, the Sioux City Police Department launched what would become one of their most intensive investigations. Detectives worked around the clock, piecing together the final hours of Terry's life. They retraced her steps through downtown Sioux City, interviewing dozens of witnesses who had seen her that night. Each conversation added another layer to the puzzle, but the most crucial piece kept emerging: the white Chevy Nova. Multiple witnesses confirmed seeing Terry getting into the vehicle. Some remembered her speaking with the driver, the conversation appearing casual enough that it hadn't raised immediate concern. But no one could provide a clear description of the driver, a detail that would haunt investigators for decades to come. Yet, as they dug deeper, a name began to surface in their investigation: Thomas Dwayne Poppe. Poppe wasn't a stranger to law enforcement. In fact, he had caught their attention for an incident that occurred shortly after Terry's murder, one that set off alarm bells throughout the department. He had been arrested for firing shots into his ex-girlfriend's home with a weapon that made detectives' blood run cold, a 20-gauge shotgun, the same type used to kill Terry. More than that, Poppe owned a white Chevy Nova that matched witness descriptions perfectly. The coincidences seemed too strong to ignore. Here was a man with a violent streak access to the same type of weapon used in the murder, and a car matching witness descriptions. Detective Tony Sunclades and Sergeant Morton felt in their guts they had their man. But in 1983, gut feelings weren't enough to secure a conviction. Without modern DNA analysis, investigators couldn't conclusively link the shotgun pellets to Pop's weapon or definitively prove it was his car Terry had entered. The county attorney's office delivered a crushing blow. The circumstantial evidence, though compelling, wasn't enough to secure a conviction. It was a decision that would haunt the department for decades. The case never officially closed, passed from detective to detective over the years. They kept tabs on Pape as he moved between states, always watching, unable to act. But as forensic science evolved, what seemed impossible to prove in 1983 might not remain so forever. After 41 years of dead ends and false hopes, everything changed in late 2024. The Woodbury County Attorney's Office, under James Loomis's leadership, had begun a systematic review of cold cases. When they reached Terry McCauley's file, something was different this time. The technology that hadn't existed in 1983 was now available, and the evidence that had once seemed insufficient suddenly held new promise. Investigators revisited the ballistic evidence from the crime scene. The shotgun pellets that had been collected in 1983 still told their brutal story, but now they could tell it with far more detail. Modern forensic analysis revealed distinct markings that could be matched to a specific type of 20-gauge shotgun, the same type that Thomas Dwayne Poppe had used in another crime shortly after Terry's murder. The breakthrough wasn't just about new technology. It was about connecting dots that had been staring investigators in the face for 4 decades. The white Chevy Nova, the shotgun, the timing of Pop's other violent crime. All these pieces that had seemed circumstantial in 1983 now formed a clearer picture when viewed through the lens of modern investigative techniques. In January 2025, the case was presented to a grand jury. This time, the evidence spoke loudly enough. The grand jury returned what the McCauley family had waited 41 years to hear: an indictment. Thomas Dwayne Poppe, the man who had been on investigators' radar since 1983, would finally face charges for Terry's murder. On January 11, 2025, law enforcement officers approached a house in Longview, Washington. Inside was the man they believed had walked free for far too long. Thomas Dwayne Poppe, now in his 60s, was taken into custody without incident. The man who had allegedly killed a teenage mother with a point-blank shotgun blast offered no resistance as officers placed him in the handcuffs. News of Poppe's arrest spread quickly through the indigenous community. Advocacy groups that had long used Terry's case to highlight the plight of missing and murdered indigenous women celebrated this step toward justice while acknowledging how many similar cases remained unsolved.
When we started meeting with our Woodbury County Attorney's Office, James Loomis has done an excellent job. He gave us his word, he followed through, and we're just more than grateful for that, because that's not, in many cases like this, that's not what we see, especially coming from the Native community.
You know, after 41 years, you definitely start to lose hope. And I think more recently, with how the community has responded to some of the, local advocacy groups, coming together and providing a platform for cases like this.
Poppe was extradited back to Iowa, where he faced a first-degree murder charge. His bond was set at $3 million, a number that reflected both the severity of the crime and the 4 decades he had spent avoiding justice. As he sat in a cell in the Woodbury County Jail, the same questions that had haunted investigators in 1983 still lingered. Why Terry? What had happened after she got into that car? What could drive someone to commit such a brutal act? Thomas Dwayne Poppe now sits in a cell in Woodbury County, awaiting trial for a crime that has haunted Sioux City for over 4 decades. While his arrest brings some measure of closure to the McCauley family, It also raises disturbing questions about justice delayed. How many other killers are out there, walking free, waiting for a technology to catch up with their crimes? How many other families are still waiting for answers? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to learn more about cases like Terry's and the ongoing fight for justice, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell.
I don't think it really hit until today, until the news and the release was made. Just the kind of the steps leading up to have been very, very surreal. They, even sitting here now, it's like, is this a dream? Is this really happening? And we're here.